1912, Freud wrote a paper called Recommendations to Physicians Practising Psychoanalysis, where he sets the core technical rules for psychoanalytic practice. The paper sets 9 rules. The first one talks about the hardest problem for psychoanalysts when treating multiple patients a day, like 6, 8, even more patients every single day. And it's not just the physical act of sitting in a chair for long hours listening to patients, but also the huge cognitive load involved in the work. The paper describes the task of keeping in mind all names, dates, and everything else that each patient communicates in sessions. And this is not just over a few weeks of brief therapy. This is over the course of months, sometimes years of continuous daily treatment. The paper says that doing this memorization will make people feel shocked, amazed, or even pity, but Freud rejects memorization entirely. The technique Freud proposes in the paper is described as a very simple one. He says, the technique consists simply not directing one's notice to anything in particular. Psychoanalysts are supposed to maintain what Freud calls evenly suspended attention in the face of all that they hear. The psychological mechanics behind the evenly suspended attention are highly specific, and Freud explains exactly why deliberate attention is so dangerous. For Freud to pay close attention to everything patients say is dangerous, because when psychoanalysts deliberately concentrate their attention to a specific topic that is said in a therapy room, psychoanalysts automatically and often unconsciously begin to select from the material they are listening. The paper points out that as soon as psychoanalysts focus hard, one point becomes fixed in their mind with particular clearness, and some other point will be disregarded. They will be making an active selection of the data in real time. And Freud warned that in making a selection, psychoanalysts will be following their own expectations or inclinations. Freud in the paper explained that if a psychoanalyst follows their expectations, they are in danger of never finding anything but what they already know, confirming their own bias. By selecting a topic in the patient's speech, the psychoanalyst filters out. They will be finding what they already know, completely blind to alternative explanations. And the paper goes even further regarding inclinations. It states that if psychoanalysts follow their inclinations, they will certainly falsify what they may perceive because they are imposing their own desires, their own biases, and their own theoretical frameworks onto the raw data of the patient's speech. The paper explains that the fundamental rule of psychoanalysis for the patient is that they must communicate everything that occurs to them without criticism or selection. They must speak the trivial, the embarrassing, the seemingly irrelevant, and the doctor's rule must be the exact mirror of that. If the patient is providing unfiltered, unselected material, the doctor cannot then apply a conscious filter to it. The paper argues that psychoanalysts should listen fully and let their mind remember and notice things naturally without forcing memorization. And Freud says in the paper, he should simply listen and not bother about whether he's keeping anything in mind. So just listen and don't try to remember, which for some, it may feel very insensitive. But in the paper, Freud explains the elements of the material that already makes connected context will naturally be in the doctor's conscious disposal, so they don't have to force to memorize everything that the patient says. Logical narratives hold themselves together in the human brain, but the rest of the material, the parts that are unconnected, chaotic, or seemingly meaningless, that material seems at first to be submerged, sinking down into the unconscious memory waiting, and they come to light when patients bring up something new to which it can be related. The unconscious does the sorting and the connecting in the background far more efficiently than the conscious mind. The paper notes that mistakes in this process of remembering only occur when psychoanalysts are disturbed by some personal consideration. In other words, when the doctor falls below the standard of an ideal analyst and lets their own ego, their own anxieties, or daily stresses interfere with the therapeutical work. But otherwise, confusion with material from other patients occurs very rarely. The second rule is about note-taking, and Freud writes quite bluntly, I cannot advise the taking of full notes, the keeping of a shorthand record, etc., during analytic sessions. Freud gives two main reasons against this practice. The first one is practical. He says, it makes an unfavorable impression on some patients and awakes their resistance. It breaks the intimacy of the room. And the second reason is much deeper. The same considerations that apply to deliberate conscious attention apply to the physical act of writing notes. The paper argues that a deliberate selection from the material of the patient's speech will necessarily be made when writing the notes or the shorthand. But crucially, a significant portion of the psychoanalyst's own mental activity is focused in the mechanical act of writing. Psychoanalysts are turning themselves into a writer or reporter instead of an analyst. Freud argues that we simply cannot maintain a evenly suspended attention if our cognitive load is focused on spelling a name, capturing a sentence perfectly, or deciding what bullet point to use. Now, Freud does allow note-taking for some rare exceptions, for things like dates, dream details, or especially important events which could be possibly used for scientific purposes. But even then, there is a strict protocol. Freud admits that he's not in the habit of doing this during the session. For those special instances, he writes them down from memory in the evening after the day's work is over. The third rule. Freud acknowledges that taking notes during a session might seem justified if psychoanalysts wanted to publish a scientific case study on general scientific grounds. That makes total sense as they need data to prove their theories. However, Freud says we should remember something important. Very detailed and exact case reports are not as valuable as people think. They may look precise on paper, but that precision is often just an appearance. It looks scientific, but it doesn't fully capture what happens in a real analysis. These reports are usually tiring to read, and no matter how detailed they are, they cannot replace being in the therapy room and experiencing the process. The fourth rule is that psychoanalysis aims to combine treatment and research, but they do not always work well together at the same time. Studying a case too scientifically while therapy is still ongoing can harm the treatment. Cases do best when the psychoanalysts stay open, avoid fixed theories, and allow unexpected development. Psychoanalysts should focus on the treatment first, without overthinking or predicting. Only after the analysis ends should the material be organized and studied more carefully. The fifth rule is the emotional coldness. Freud specifically says that analysts should act like a surgeon during the treatment. A surgeon puts personal feelings aside and focuses only on doing the job well. In modern days, we are constantly told that empathy is the ultimate tool for connection. But Freud argues in this paper that empathy functions as a dangerous distraction. The paper identifies this as a therapeutic ambition. The most dangerous feeling for a psychoanalyst is the wish to impress others or to prove that psychoanalysis works. This ambition harms the work and makes the psychoanalyst unable to deal with the patient's resistance, since patients improve mainly because of forces inside themselves, not because the analyst tries too hard. So, staying emotionally cold, according to Freud, helps both sides. It protects the psychoanalyst's own emotional life, and it gives the patient the best possible help. The sixth rule. In psychoanalysis, the patient must say everything that comes to mind without filtering or hiding thoughts. This allows hidden feelings and memories to come to surface, and patients should not choose only important thoughts, hide thoughts because they are silly, embarrassing, or illogical, and the doctor must listen openly without judging or selecting what seems important, and must be receptive to the patient's unconscious meaning. Freud compares this to a telephone. The patient sends signals and the doctor receives and translates them. For this to work properly, the psychoanalyst must first undergo psychoanalysis themselves in order to face their own hidden fears, desires, and conflicts in personal analysis. If they have unresolved inner conflicts, there will be a psychoanalyst who develops blind spots and may distort what they hear. Personal analysis reduces these blind spots, improves self-knowledge, and makes the therapeutic work more accurate. In this paper, Freud also emphasized the high value of self-knowledge and increasing self-control, which cannot be learned from books or attending lectures. And he notes that even after formal analysis is complete, the process for a practically healthy person remains incomplete, and they must continue self-analysis for the rest of their lives, always expecting to find something new and unresolved within themselves. Now, Freud says in the paper, if a doctor refuses to be analyzed, they risk projecting their own issues onto patients, turning personal views into universal truths, and damaging the psychoanalytic work. The seventh rule is the dangers of relatability. In other words, if a person tells someone they are struggling with anxiety, the immediate response is to say, "Oh, me too, let me tell you about mine." We do this to relate to them, to make them feel less alone. But in the paper, Freud condemns this practice in the clinical setting. The psychoanalyst should remain neutral and not share personal details such as revealing their own fears and struggles, or even becoming emotionally close to the patient. While sharing their own struggles might seem helpful, it can make the patient speak more easily. It only brings out what the patient already knows and does not uncover their own unconscious material. And this approach can backfire, causing the patient to focus on the psychoanalyst rather than themselves. And they may find the analysis of their analyst much more interesting than their own. And it also confuses the roles, making it harder to work through deeper issues like transference. For Freud, true psychoanalysis requires the psychoanalyst to act like a mirror, reflecting only what the patient brings, keeping the focus entirely on the patient's inner world. Personal sharing may feel natural, but neutrality is what allows real insight to emerge. The eighth rule. Sometimes during analysis, the psychoanalyst may feel tempted to educate the patient, even if that's not their main goal. When a patient overcomes the blocks that were holding them back, the doctor naturally sees new possibilities for them, It's normal to want to help the patient reach high goals and make the most of their abilities. But not every patient is naturally good at turning their instinct into creative or socially useful activities, which in psychoanalysis is called sublimation. Many people might never have become ill if they could have done this easily. Forcing patients toward sublimation can make life harder for them. A doctor should mainly be patient with a person's weaknesses. Even small improvements, like helping someone enjoy life more or work better, are successes. Also, some people become ill precisely because they tried to push their instincts too far. For those who can sublimate naturally, this usually happens on its own once their blocks are removed. So, while it's admirable to want patients to reach high levels of sublimation, it's not always the right approach. And the ninth rule is the dangers of intellectualization. Freud says in the paper, how much should the patient think and reason on their own during treatment? This depends on the person, but in general, the doctor must be careful. It's not helpful to give patients tasks like recalling memories or analyzing a period of their life. They need to learn that thinking hard or concentrating doesn't solve the problems of neurosis. The only way to make progress is by following the basic rule of psychoanalysis, not judging or criticizing the unconscious or its thoughts. This rule is essentially important for patients who like to talk a lot, think cleverly about their issues, or get lost in intellectual discussions instead of working through the problems. For this, Freud says, I avoid giving patients books. They learn more and better through personal experience than through reading. In institutions, reading can sometimes help prepare patients or create a supportive environment, but it's not a replacement for real experience. And Freud also adds, a strong warning, do not try to win over parents or relatives by giving them psychoanalytic books. This usually triggers their natural resistance to treatment, and the therapy may never even start. Now, summarizing everything. Rule 1, evenly suspended attention. Rule 2, no note-taking during sessions. Rule 3, verbatim case reports do not solve credibility. Rule 4, do not mix research with ongoing treatment. Rule 5, emotional coldness and no therapeutic ambition. Rule 6, psychoanalysts must undergo personal analysis. Rule 7, no personal self-disclosure. Rule 8, do not push sublimation or over-educate. And Rule 9, avoid intellectualization and forced intellectual cooperation.